Welcome to the Ember and Ink Story Archive, a place where forgotten history, dark legends, and strange truths are waiting to be told. Some stories are familiar, some are disturbing, and some are stranger than fiction. Tonight's entry begins now. The Michelin Guide. Every year, the world's greatest chefs hold their breath. Months, sometimes years, of work can be rewarded with a single star, or destroyed when that star disappears. Careers have been made. Restaurants have closed. Some chefs have admitted the pressure became unbearable. Yet this symbol of culinary perfection wasn't created by chefs. It wasn't created by critics. It wasn't even created by a restaurant. It was invented by two men who sold tires. This is the remarkable story of how André and Édouard Michelin accidentally created one of the most influential books in history. Chapter 1. A Journey Begins. The world has always searched for symbols of excellence. A crown represents a king. A gold medal marks an Olympic champion. A Nobel Prize recognizes the greatest achievements in science, literature, and peace. But in the world of fine dining, perhaps no symbol carries more weight than a single, small star. It is not made of gold. It is not awarded on live television. There is no grand ceremony before cheering crowds. Instead, it quietly appears beside the name of a restaurant inside a guidebook. For some chefs, it is the culmination of decades of work. For others, it is a dream that remains forever out of reach. A single star can transform a modest neighborhood restaurant into an international destination. 2 stars can convince travelers to change their route. 3 stars. 3 stars can persuade people to cross oceans. Today, the Michelin star has become one of the highest honors in the culinary world. Yet hidden behind that famous symbol lies a question surprisingly few people ever ask. Why is the highest award in fine dining named after a tire company? How did a manufacturer of rubber become the most influential voice in haute cuisine? The answer takes us back more than a century, to a time before highways, before traffic lights, before gas stations lined every major road. Back to an era when owning an automobile was so unusual that children would stop in the street simply to watch one pass. The story begins in France. The year is 1889. Paris is preparing for one of the greatest celebrations in its history. To mark the centennial of the French Revolution, the city hosts the Exposition Universelle, a world's fair unlike anything Europe has ever seen. Engineers, inventors, and industrialists arrive from around the globe to display the future. Standing above them all is a controversial new structure. Many Parisians call it an eyesore. Some of France's greatest artists sign petitions demanding its removal. A few critics claim it will ruin the skyline forever. It is a tower made almost entirely of iron. 300 meters tall, the tallest man-made structure ever built. Today we know it simply as the Eiffel Tower. While visitors gaze upward in amazement, another revolution is quietly beginning. Not in Paris, but nearly 400 kilometers to the south. Nestled among the volcanic hills of central France lies the city of Clermont-Ferrand. It is an ancient city, known for its black volcanic stone, Roman history, and cathedral that seems to rise from the lava itself. Unlike Paris, Clermont-Ferrand is not the center of fashion or politics. It is a city of workshops, factories, craftsmen, and industry. Here, a small family business faces an uncertain future. The company manufactures rubber products, hoses, belts, valves, agricultural equipment, useful items, but hardly the foundation of a great industrial empire. Business is difficult. Competition is growing. The future is uncertain. Few people outside the region have even heard the company's name, Michelin. It is at this crossroads that two brothers step forward. André Michelin, the elder brother, is an engineer by training. Curious by nature, he believes nearly every problem has a practical solution waiting to be discovered. He possesses the analytical mind of an inventor. He enjoys solving puzzles that others overlook. His younger brother, Édouard Michelin, is different, quiet, thoughtful. Originally trained as an artist, Édouard has an eye for design and detail. Where André sees mechanical solutions, Édouard sees elegance and refinement. Together, they make an unlikely but remarkably balanced partnership. Neither man sets out to change the world. Their immediate goal is far more modest: save the family business. When they assume control of the company in 1889, they inherit more than a factory. They inherit uncertainty. Europe is changing rapidly. The Industrial Revolution is transforming cities. Railways stretch across the continent. Steamships shrink oceans. Electric lighting begins replacing gas lamps. New inventions appear almost monthly. Yet one invention remains little more than a curiosity: the automobile. The earliest motor cars are noisy, slow, uncomfortable, unreliable. Starting one often requires strength, patience, and more than a little luck. Breakdowns are common. Roads are rough. Fuel is difficult to find. Many people view the automobile as little more than an expensive toy for wealthy gentlemen. In all of France, there are fewer than 3,000 automobiles. Imagine trying to build a successful tire company when almost no one owns a vehicle that needs tires. That is the challenge facing André and Édouard Michelin. At first glance, the situation appears hopeless. A tire company without drivers. A future industry without customers. Most businessmen would focus on selling harder, advertising more, lowering prices, finding new investors. The Michelin brothers choose a different path. Instead of asking, "How do we sell more tires?" they ask a far more profound question. Why aren't people driving? That single question will change everything, because sometimes the greatest obstacle is not convincing customers to buy your product. It is giving them a reason to use it in the first place. The brothers cannot yet know it. But the answer they are about to discover will eventually influence tourism. Road maps, hotels, restaurants, international travel, and the careers of chefs who have not even been born. It will create one of the most respected guidebooks ever published, one that people will trust with vacations, celebrations, business trips, marriage proposals, and once-in-a-lifetime meals. Not because it was designed to judge food, but because it was designed to sell tires. That extraordinary journey is only just beginning. Chapter 2. The puncture that changed everything. Every great invention begins with a problem. Sometimes, that problem is as small as a nail in the road. If you had traveled the roads of France in the early 1890s, one thing would have become obvious almost immediately. Travel was slow, not because engines lacked power, not because people lacked ambition, but because the roads themselves seemed determined to stop you. Most roads outside the major cities were little more than hardened dirt, Summer covered them in thick clouds of dust that settled over horses, wagons, and travelers alike. Autumn rains transformed them into muddy ruts deep enough to trap wagon wheels. Winter brought ice. Spring brought potholes. Every season offered a new challenge. Long-distance travel demanded patience more than speed. For centuries, this had simply been accepted as the natural order of things. But a new invention was beginning to challenge that reality: the bicycle. Throughout Europe, bicycles were becoming more than a curiosity. They were becoming practical transportation. Workers rode them to factories. Doctors rode them between villages. Messengers carried letters across towns. For the first time, ordinary people could travel farther than walking distance without relying on a horse. Yet bicycles carried a problem remarkably similar to the one that would soon plague automobiles: their tires. The earliest bicycles often rode on solid rubber wheels. They were durable, but painfully uncomfortable. Every stone, every crack, every uneven patch of road traveled directly through the frame into the rider's hands and spine. A long journey could leave a cyclist exhausted before reaching their destination. Then came a remarkable breakthrough. In 1888, a Scottish veterinarian named John Boyd Dunlop developed a practical pneumatic tire, a tire filled with compressed air rather than solid rubber. The idea itself was not entirely new. Inventors had experimented with air-filled tires decades earlier, but Dunlop's design proved practical enough for everyday use. Suddenly, bicycles became smoother, faster, more comfortable. Cyclists embraced the new technology almost overnight. There was only one problem. When the tire punctured, everything stopped. Unlike modern bicycle tires, these early pneumatic tires were glued directly onto the wheel. Repairing one was a frustrating process. The damaged tire had to be peeled away, the old adhesive carefully removed, a patch applied, fresh glue spread evenly across the rim. Then came the waiting. Hours could pass before the glue cured enough for the bicycle to be ridden again. A single nail on the road could end an entire day's journey. For many riders, the promise of air-filled comfort simply wasn't worth the inconvenience. It was an elegant invention, trapped by an impractical design. Then, according to Michelin Company history, chance intervened. One day, in 1891, a cyclist arrived at the Michelin factory in Clermont-Ferrand. His bicycle had suffered a puncture. He needed help. The repair reportedly consumed hours. The Michelin brothers watched the entire process. As engineers often do, they asked a simple question: why should changing a tire be this difficult? The problem wasn't the air inside the tire. The problem was the tire itself. It had become permanently attached to the wheel. If the tire could somehow be removed, everything would change. André and Édouard immediately began experimenting. The challenge was far from simple. A removable tire still had to remain perfectly secure while traveling over rough roads. It had to withstand bumps, sharp turns, heavy loads, and constant vibration. If it slipped from the rim while riding, the consequences could be disastrous. The brothers spent weeks refining their design. Piece by piece, failure after failure, until they achieved something extraordinary. A pneumatic tire that could be removed, repaired, and replaced in minutes rather than hours. Today, changing a tire feels routine. In 1891, it represented a revolution. The Michelin brothers knew they had something important, but inventions rarely become successful simply because they exist. People must believe they work. That belief usually comes through demonstration. Fortunately, an opportunity was approaching. one of the greatest cycling competitions in the world. The Paris-Brest-Paris race, held in September 1891, it challenged competitors to ride nearly 1,200 kilometers, roughly 750 miles, from Paris to the coastal city of Brest and back again. It was an astonishing test of endurance. Cyclists rode day and night. Sleep became a luxury. Mechanical reliability mattered almost as much as physical strength. Michelin persuaded French cyclist Charles Terron to compete using their new removable pneumatic tires. Many observers remained skeptical. Some believed the tires would never survive such punishment. Others argued that solid rubber remained more dependable. As the race unfolded, punctures inevitably occurred. But while other competitors struggled through lengthy repairs, Terron's Michelin tires could be removed and repaired far more quickly, hour after hour, kilometer after kilometer. The advantage grew. After nearly 3 exhausting days on the road, Charles Terron crossed the finish line first. His victory electrified the cycling world. Michelin's invention had not merely survived one of the toughest races ever organized, it had helped win it. Orders for the new tires increased dramatically. The brothers had solved a genuine problem. But André Michelin's mind was already drifting elsewhere. Bicycles represented only the beginning. Across Europe, a handful of inventors continued experimenting with something even more ambitious. Vehicles that required no horse, machines powered entirely by engines. Most people still dismissed them as expensive novelties. André Michelin disagreed. He believed the automobile would someday transform society. Not immediately. Perhaps not even for many years. But eventually, if that future arrived, every automobile would need tires. The bicycle had taught the brothers an invaluable lesson. Innovation alone was not enough. People had to trust it. And trust was earned one successful journey at a time. The Michelin brothers had solved the problem of repairing a puncture. Now they faced an even greater challenge. How do you build an entire business around an invention almost nobody owns? The answer would require them to think far beyond rubber, far beyond factories, far beyond bicycles. They would have to convince an entire nation to embrace the automobile itself, because if people never learn to love driving, they would never need Michelin tires. And so, the brothers turned their attention toward a machine that many believed had no future. A machine that would eventually reshape cities, economies, and the modern world. Chapter 3. Creating the motorist. Before Michelin could sell tires to motorists, France first needed motorists. In 1891, the future must have seemed almost limitless. The Michelin brothers had transformed a frustrating roadside problem into a practical invention. Their removable pneumatic bicycle tire could be taken from the wheel, repaired and replaced far more quickly than the glued tires used by many cyclists. Then came the victory that proved it worked. In September 1891, Charles Terron rode from Paris to Brest and back again, a journey of nearly 1,200 kilometers, using Michelin's removable tires. He returned to Paris exhausted but victorious. For André and Édouard Michelin, the result was more than an advertising success. It was confirmation. A tire did not have to be accepted in the form in which it already existed. It could be improved. It could be made lighter, more comfortable, more practical. And most importantly, it could help transform travel from an ordeal into something people might willingly choose to do. Orders increased. The Michelin name began appearing beyond Clermont-Ferrand. Cyclists who had never heard of the brothers now wanted the tires that had survived Paris-Brest-Paris. Yet André and Édouard were already looking beyond the bicycle. Another machine was beginning to appear on the roads of Europe. It was larger, louder, more complicated, and according to many observers, almost completely unnecessary. The automobile. A machine searching for a purpose. During the early 1890s, the automobile did not yet represent freedom. It did not symbolize the open road, the family holiday, or the daily commute. There were no familiar networks of filling stations. There were few repair garages. Directional signs were inconsistent or non-existent. Reliable road maps made specifically for motorists were difficult to find. A person traveling by train could consult a timetable, purchase a ticket, and reasonably expect to reach the destination. A person traveling by automobile had no such certainty. The journey might end because of a broken chain, an overheated engine, a blocked fuel line, a puncture, a road that disappeared into mud, or simply because no one nearby knew how to repair the machine. Early automobiles were often built individually or in very small numbers. Controls differed from one model to another. Some were powered by steam, others by electricity, and an increasing number by gasoline engines. There was not even universal agreement on what the automobile would become. Was it a replacement for the horse? A mechanical carriage for wealthy families? A racing machine? A commercial vehicle? Or merely a passing novelty? Many people saw little reason to own one. Horses were familiar, railways were dependable. The automobile was expensive, temperamental, and frightening. It startled animals. It filled streets with noise and fumes. It sometimes moved faster than pedestrians believed any road vehicle should move. And when it failed, it often became an extremely heavy object, stranded far from anyone capable of helping. Yet André Michelin looked at these awkward machines and saw possibility. He did not see the automobile as it was. He imagined what it might become. If engines improved, if roads improved, if repairs became easier, if drivers could find fuel, if journeys became comfortable enough to enjoy, then automobiles might cease to be toys. They might become part of ordinary life. And every one of them would require tires. The problem beneath the automobile. Most early automobiles traveled on solid rubber tires or on wheels derived from carriage designs. Solid rubber was strong, but strength came at a price. The tire did little to soften the road. Every stone and rut struck the wheel, passed through the axle and shook the vehicle. The experience could be punishing for passengers. It was also punishing for the machine. Constant vibration loosened fasteners, damaged components, and added stress to vehicles that were already mechanically fragile. Pneumatic tires offered a possible solution. A cushion of air between the wheel and the road could absorb some of the shock. The same principle that had improved the bicycle might improve the automobile. But an automobile was not a bicycle. It weighed considerably more. It traveled with passengers, fuel, and machinery. Its engine delivered forces that a bicycle tire had never been required to withstand. A tire suitable for a cyclist could not simply be enlarged and expected to carry a motor car across hundreds of kilometers. The brothers would have to demonstrate that air-filled tires were not merely comfortable. They had to prove they were durable. And there was no more dramatic place to prove new automotive technology than in a race. Paris to Bordeaux, and back again. In 1895, France prepared for an extraordinary competition. The course would begin in Paris, travel southwest to Bordeaux, and then return to Paris. The full journey covered approximately 1,200 kilometers. Today, such a route can be completed in hours on modern highways. In 1895, it represented a mechanical expedition. Drivers would pass through towns and countryside on roads never designed for high-speed machines. They would travel through daylight and darkness, Dust could obscure the road. Rain could turn sections of the route into mud. Vehicles would be tested not merely for speed, but for survival. The event attracted different kinds of motorcars built by competing manufacturers. Some used gasoline, others used steam. Designers experimented with engines, steering systems, transmissions, and brakes. There was no accepted formula for the modern automobile because the modern automobile did not yet exist. The Michelin brothers saw their opportunity. They decided to enter a car fitted with pneumatic tires, but no suitable vehicle was readily available, so they created one. Leclerc. The Michelin automobile was built using components from different sources and equipped with a Daimler-type engine. Its appearance was unusual, its construction was imperfect, its steering was reportedly difficult. The vehicle did not possess the polished elegance of the automobiles that would appear in later years. It looked experimental, because that was exactly what it was. The brothers named it Leclerc, the Lightning. The name sounded swift, confident, almost invincible. The reality was less graceful. Leclerc was heavy and difficult to control. Its mismatched construction gave it a somewhat crooked or zigzagging path, and the automobile was not expected to challenge the fastest competitors. But speed was not Michelin's only objective. The car carried something more important than hopes of victory. It carried pneumatic tires. For the first time, Michelin intended to show that a motor vehicle could complete an extreme road journey while riding on air. Many people doubted it. A bicycle and its rider were relatively light. An automobile carrying an engine, fuel, and passengers placed far greater pressure upon its wheels. The tires might burst. They might detach from the rims. They might fail repeatedly under the strain. To some observers, the Michelin entry must have seemed less like a serious competitor than a rolling experiment. Perhaps it was. But experiments can change industries, even when they do not win races. The race begins. On June 11, 1895, the competitors departed from Paris. The roads ahead offered few comforts. There were no modern service teams waiting every few kilometers. No radio communication. No computerized instruments warning drivers that something was about to fail. Crews had to understand their own machines. They carried tools and replacement parts. When something broke, they stopped beside the road and attempted to repair it. The race continued through the night. Headlamps provided only limited illumination. Drivers navigated roads that could be difficult to follow even in daylight. Fatigue became dangerous. So did speed. The vehicles lacked modern seat belts, protective passenger compartments, and dependable brakes. Every mechanical failure carried consequences. Leclerc struggled. The car was not fast. It suffered punctures and mechanical difficulties. At times, keeping it on the road was itself an achievement. The Michelin brothers were not demonstrating that pneumatic tires had already become perfect. They were demonstrating that the idea was possible. Each repaired puncture became part of the experiment. Each kilometer completed answered another doubt. The air-filled tires flexed beneath the weight of the machine. They absorbed impacts that solid rubber would have transmitted directly into the vehicle. They carried Leclerc south toward Bordeaux and then back toward Paris. The car didn't win. It was never close to winning. The first vehicle to complete the route was driven by Émile Levasseur, who traveled for roughly 2 days with remarkably little rest. Because his Panhard Levasseur didn't satisfy every technical condition established for the official prize, the formal result became complicated, but his performance became legendary. Leclerc arrived far behind the leaders. By the standards of a conventional race, Michelin had failed. But André and Édouard had not entered merely to collect a trophy. Their pneumatic tires had carried an automobile through one of the most demanding road trials yet attempted. The vehicle had traveled nearly 1,200 kilometers. It had reached Bordeaux, it had returned to Paris, and it had done so while riding on air. That was the victory Michelin needed. Winning without finishing first. There are moments in business when losing publicly can still prove an idea. Leclerc demonstrated something that a newspaper advertisement could not. Michelin could claim that pneumatic automobile tires were practical because the public had watched them endure a journey across France. The experiment exposed weaknesses. The tires still required improvement. So did the wheels. So did the vehicle itself. But failure had become information. Every puncture showed where the design could be strengthened. Every delay revealed what motorists would require. Every rough section of road demonstrated the value of a tire capable of absorbing shock. The brothers understood that automotive development would not happen through one perfect invention. It would happen through repeated trials. Build, test, fail, repair, improve, then test again. It was the same method they had used with the bicycle tire, now applied to a machine that might someday transform the world, and the automobile was beginning to improve quickly. Manufacturers refined gasoline engines. Steering became more dependable. Braking systems became more effective. Production increased. Motor races attracted crowds and newspaper attention. Each competition served as entertainment, but it also functioned as a public laboratory. A winning vehicle could create demand. A failed part could inspire redesign. A new tire could become famous after a single successful journey. Michelin embraced this world enthusiastically. The brothers understood that the automobile needed more than engineering. It needed imagination. People had to look at these machines and see something desirable. They had to believe that motoring represented progress rather than inconvenience. They needed confidence in the tires beneath them. They also needed a name they could remember. A pile of tires becomes a man. The origins of Michelin's most famous symbol can be traced to 1894. That year, André and Édouard attended the Universal, International, and Colonial Exhibition in Lyon. Michelin tires were arranged at the company's display. According to the story preserved by Michelin, Édouard looked at a stack of tires and noticed something peculiar. The pile resembled a human body. Add arms, he suggested, and it would look like a man. It was a passing observation. But the image remained with the brothers. 4 years later, in 1898, they met the French illustrator Marius Roussillon, better known by his artistic name, Au Galop. Roussillon showed them an advertising design he had created for a brewery. It featured a large man raising a glass beneath a Latin phrase taken from the Roman poet Horace, Nunc est bibendum. Now is the time to drink. The brewery had rejected the design. The Michelin brothers saw another possibility. The man holding the drink could be replaced by the figure Édouard had imagined, a body formed from stacked tires. The glass could be filled not with wine or beer, but with the objects motorists feared most: nails, broken glass, and other road debris capable of destroying an ordinary tire. Au Galop transformed the idea into a poster. A strange white figure made of tires raised his goblet toward the viewer. Around him, competitors appeared unable to withstand the hazards he was prepared to swallow. The message was bold. Michelin tires could drink up the obstacles of the road. The tire man became known as bibendum, taken from the Latin phrase printed above him. He looked very different from the friendly Michelin man recognized today. Early pneumatic tires were pale because carbon black had not yet become the standard strengthening additive that made later tires black. Bibendum was therefore white. He wore spectacles. He smoked a cigar. He resembled a prosperous gentleman of the period, exactly the kind of wealthy customer most likely to own an automobile in 1898. He was not designed merely to be cute. He represented confidence, durability, modernity. He looked at nails and shattered glass, not with fear, but appetite. Giving the machine a personality. The creation of Bibendum was another example of the Michelin brothers thinking beyond the factory. A tire was difficult to humanize. It was a ring of rubber. Necessary, perhaps, but not exciting. Bibendum changed that. He gave the product a face. He could appear in posters, at exhibitions, beside racecourses, in advertisements and printed material. He could teach motorists about tires, celebrate victories and reassure travelers. Where the automobile frightened some people, Bibendum appeared fearless. Where roads looked dangerous, he seemed prepared. Where the machinery of motoring felt cold and complicated, he offered a recognizable companion. The Michelin brothers had created more than a mascot. They had created a guide. Not yet the guide printed in a book, but a symbolic guide who seemed to accompany the motorist along the road. That role would become increasingly important, because as the brothers studied the young automobile industry, they began to see that better tires solved only one part of the problem. The empty road ahead. By the final years of the 19th century, automobiles were improving, but ownership remained extremely limited. France had fewer than 3,000 motorcars as the new century approached. For a company betting its future on automobile tires, that number was painfully small. The brothers could manufacture an excellent product. They could demonstrate it in races. They could advertise it with one of the most memorable characters ever created. But none of that changed the central economic reality. Tires wore out only when vehicles moved. A car sitting inside a carriage house did not require replacement tires. A cautious owner who drove only a few kilometers near home didn't create much demand. Michelin needed motorists to travel farther, more often, with greater confidence. But confidence remained difficult to find. Suppose a driver wished to leave Paris and visit a town several hundred kilometers away. Which road should be taken? Where could fuel be purchased? Where was the nearest mechanic? Which towns had hotels? Would those hotels accept motorists? Where could replacement parts be found? How did one repair a puncture? What distances separated one community from another? Where could the traveler stop for a meal? Today, many of those questions can be answered within seconds. A navigation system calculates the route. A fuel gauge estimates the remaining distance. A telephone identifies nearby hotels, restaurants, and repair shops. In the closing years of the 19th century, the motorist could carry none of those assurances. Driving beyond familiar roads meant entering uncertainty. The automobile promised freedom. But freedom without information could quickly become isolation. André Michelin began to understand that the greatest obstacle to selling tires was no longer the tire. It was the journey. Motorists did not merely need reliable wheels. They needed to know where they were going. They needed to know what waited along the way. They needed reasons to leave home, and they needed someone to tell them that the road ahead could be traveled safely. A different kind of tire company. This realization changed the nature of Michelin's ambition. The company could remain a manufacturer. It could make tires, sell them, and hope the automobile industry grew on its own. Or it could help that growth happen. Michelin could encourage better roads, provide information, promote destinations, teach drivers how to care for their vehicles, help them find mechanics, fuel, accommodation, and food. The brothers could not create millions of customers overnight, but perhaps they could create something more important: a culture of travel. If people began exploring France by automobile, they would cover greater distances. Greater distances would wear down tires. Worn tires would require replacement. The logic was simple, but carrying it out would require an idea unlike any ordinary advertisement. The brothers did not need to tell people repeatedly that Michelin manufactured tires. They needed to make motorists dream about all the places those tires could take them. A factory could produce rubber. A race could prove endurance. A mascot could create recognition. But what could give the driver enough information to begin a journey? As the 19th century drew to a close, André and Édouard Michelin began preparing their answer. It would contain maps, instructions, names, addresses, distances, repair shops, hotels, and places to eat. It would be placed directly into the hands of motorists. It would be practical enough to keep inside the automobile, useful enough to consult throughout a journey, and valuable enough to quietly change the behavior of an entire generation of drivers. In 1900, the Michelin brothers would publish a small guidebook. 35,000 copies would be distributed without charge. There would be no restaurant stars, no anonymous inspectors, no promise of culinary immortality. Not yet. At first, it would simply help motorists find their way. But hidden inside its pages was one of the most brilliant business ideas of the modern age. Michelin would no longer wait for people to wear out their tires. The company would show them where to drive. Chapter 4. The greatest inventions are not always machines. Sometimes they are ideas. In the closing years of the 19th century, the automobile remained an object of curiosity. Most people had seen one only in newspaper sketches. Others had heard stories from travelers describing noisy machines that frightened horses and broke down with alarming regularity. If an automobile passed through a village, children often ran alongside it. Adults stepped out of shops simply to watch. The machine rattled. It hissed. It coughed clouds of smoke into the air. It smelled of burning oil and hot metal. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it disappeared down the dusty road. For many, it looked less like the future, and more like an expensive toy for wealthy gentlemen. There were good reasons for that opinion. Automobiles in the 1890s demanded patience. Starting an engine was often a ritual rather than a simple task. Fuel had to be purchased from pharmacies or specialty suppliers because filling stations did not yet exist. Road signs were almost non-existent outside major cities. Maps designed specifically for motorists had not yet been created. If something broke, finding someone capable of repairing it was largely a matter of luck. Even a short journey required careful planning. Long-distance travel bordered on adventure. Many inventors were attempting to solve the technical problems of the automobile. Benz in Germany, Panhard and Levasseur in France, Peugeot, de Dion, Bouton. Dozens of companies believed they could build a better motor car, but André Michelin saw a different problem. The automobile itself wasn't the greatest obstacle. The world around it was. What good was owning a remarkable machine? If there were nowhere practical to drive, he understood something that many brilliant engineers overlooked. A successful invention does not exist in isolation. It needs an entire ecosystem: roads, repairs, fuel, reliable equipment, destinations worth visiting. Without those things, even the finest automobile would remain little more than an interesting curiosity. This way of thinking set André Michelin apart from many of his contemporaries. He wasn't simply imagining a better tire. He was imagining an entirely new way of living. To convince people, however, words would not be enough. The public needed proof. And in the 19th century, nothing demonstrated reliability quite like competition. Motor racing was still in its infancy. These early races looked nothing like the polished spectacles of Formula One or Le Mans. There were no carefully designed circuits, no grandstands filled with cheering crowds, no safety barriers. The roads remained open. Competitors raced through villages, across rough country roads, and over surfaces that challenged both machine and driver. Simply reaching the finish line could be considered an achievement. In June of 1895, one such event captured the imagination of France. The Paris-Bordeaux-Paris race, nearly 1,200 kilometers, almost 750 miles. It would become one of the first great automobile races in history. Manufacturers entered not merely to win, but to prove that their machines actually worked. The Michelin brothers saw an opportunity. Rather than entering someone else's automobile, they decided to build one around their own tires. The vehicle became known as L'Éclair, the lightning. By modern standards, it hardly seemed worthy of its name. It was tall, narrow, open to the weather. Its engine produced only a fraction of the power found in today's smallest family cars. The steering demanded constant attention. The suspension offered little comfort. Dust covered the occupants from head to toe. Yet beneath the machine rested something revolutionary: Michelin's removable pneumatic tires. Many observers remained skeptical. Solid tires were still considered the safer choice. Air-filled tires, critics argued, were simply too fragile. A puncture could end the race. A failure at speed might destroy the entire vehicle. The Michelin brothers believed otherwise. As the competitors thundered south from Paris, every kilometer became a public experiment. Roads punished the machines relentlessly. Engines overheated. Chains snapped. Mechanical failures forced many drivers to abandon the race altogether. L'Éclair faced its own share of difficulties. The Michelin entry would not win. In truth, it finished well behind the leaders. By the standards of competition, it was hardly a success. But André Michelin wasn't measuring victory in trophies. He was measuring something far more valuable: proof. The tires had demonstrated remarkable performance under conditions few people believed possible. Once again, Michelin had shown that pneumatic tires belonged not only on bicycles, but on automobiles. Sometimes history remembers the winner. Sometimes it remembers the idea. The newspapers reported on the race. People discussed the astonishing new machines. Interest in the automobile grew, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The impossible began to seem practical. André watched these developments with growing excitement. Every race, every successful journey, every newspaper article added another believer. Yet he could still see the larger problem. Suppose a wealthy businessman purchased one of these new automobiles. Where would he go? How would he know which roads were suitable? Where could he buy fuel? If the engine failed in a distant town, who possessed the knowledge to repair it? Which hotel welcomed motorists? Where could he find a respectable meal after a long day's drive? These questions may seem ordinary today. In 1895, they represented barriers capable of ending an entire journey. The Michelin brothers were beginning to understand something profound. The automobile itself was only one piece of the puzzle. Travel required confidence. People needed to believe that if they ventured far from home, they would not become stranded. Confidence, more than horsepower, would determine whether the automobile succeeded. Around this same period, another idea emerged inside the Michelin company, an idea that had nothing to do with engineering. Visitors attending trade exhibitions often stopped at Michelin's display, stacked one upon another. The company's tires formed tall columns. Looking at the pile one day, Édouard Michelin reportedly smiled. "With arms," he observed, "it would make a man." The remark might have ended there. Instead, it inspired one of the most recognizable advertising characters in history. In 1898, French artist Marius Rossillon, known professionally as Au Galop, transformed the idea into a cheerful figure made entirely from stacked white tires. He raised a glass overflowing with nails and broken glass. The Latin phrase above him read, "Nunc est bibendum." Now is the time to drink. The message was playful. Michelin tires, the advertisement suggested, could drink up the hazards of the road. The public soon shortened the phrase to a single word, bibendum. Today, most of the world simply knows him as the Michelin Man. He became one of the earliest truly global advertising mascots. Friendly, memorable, immediately recognizable. But André understood something that no mascot, no matter how clever, could accomplish alone. Bibendum could make people remember Michelin. He could not make them drive. That required something entirely different. Not another invention, not another advertisement, but an entirely new way of thinking. Instead of asking, "How do we convince motorists to buy our tires?" André Michelin quietly began asking a question almost no businessmen of his era would have considered. How do we convince people to become motorists? It was an astonishing shift in perspective. The future of Michelin would not depend solely upon manufacturing better products. It would depend upon encouraging an entirely new culture, a culture of exploration, of road trips, of discovery, of journeys made simply because the road was there. The brothers had solved the problem of punctures. Now, they would attempt something infinitely more ambitious. They would persuade an entire nation to fall in love with travel. And from that single idea, a little red book would soon be born, one that would quietly reshape not only the future of Michelin, but the way the world experiences food itself. Chapter 5. The Little Red Book. Sometimes, the most influential books in history are not written to change the world. They are written to solve a simple problem. By the turn of the 20th century, France was changing. Slowly. Almost too slowly to notice from one year to the next. But if someone had stepped away from the country in 1890 and returned in 1900, the differences would have been unmistakable. Factories had grown larger. Cities were expanding. Electricity illuminated more streets each year. Telephones were beginning to connect businesses. Steam trains crisscrossed the countryside with increasing efficiency. And every now and then, an automobile appeared where only horses had traveled before. The future was arriving, not with a single dramatic moment, but one invention at a time. For André and Édouard Michelin, the signs were encouraging. The bicycle tire had proven itself. Their pneumatic automobile tires had survived public scrutiny. More manufacturers were embracing the technology, yet success remained frustratingly limited. France still had only a few thousand automobiles. Even those fortunate enough to own one often left it parked for weeks at a time. The problem was no longer confidence in the tire. It was confidence in the journey. Imagine purchasing one of these remarkable new machines in the year 1900. You decide to drive 100 kilometers to visit family. The journey begins well enough. Then, halfway there, a question arises. Where do you buy fuel? There are no service stations, no illuminated signs, no familiar logos standing beside the road. Perhaps a pharmacist in the next town sells petrol. Perhaps he doesn't. You continue driving. The road forks. Neither direction is marked. One path leads toward your destination. The other wanders into the countryside for many kilometers before ending at a village you've never heard of. Which do you choose? Suppose the engine begins making a strange sound. Who repairs automobiles? Is there a mechanic nearby? Does anyone even understand how this machine works? Night begins to fall. Where will you sleep? Which hotel welcomes motorists? Where can you safely leave your automobile until morning? And after an exhausting day, where can you enjoy a decent meal? Today, these questions seem almost absurd. Our phones answer them within seconds. Navigation systems guide us turn by turn. Reviews from complete strangers help us choose restaurants before we even leave home. In 1900, none of that existed. Every journey required faith. Faith that the road continued. Faith that supplies could be found. Faith that civilization waited beyond the next hill. André Michelin realized something extraordinary. The greatest obstacle facing motorists wasn't mechanical. It was uncertainty. People rarely fear the destination. They fear the unknown between where they are and where they hope to go. If uncertainty could somehow be removed, perhaps people would travel farther. If they traveled farther, they would wear out more tires. It was such a beautifully simple idea that almost nobody else had considered it. The brothers did not need to persuade customers to purchase rubber. They needed to remove every excuse for staying home. So they decided to create something unlike any publication that had existed before. Not a newspaper, not a catalogue, not an advertisement. A companion, a trusted traveling companion. In August 1900, timed to coincide with the Paris Exposition Universelle, the Michelin Company printed approximately 35,000 copies of a small guidebook. Its cover was bright red. Simple, easy to recognize. At first glance, it appeared almost unremarkable. Inside, however, lay an entirely new way of thinking. The guide explained how to maintain an automobile. It offered practical advice on changing tires. It listed places where fuel could be obtained. It identified mechanics capable of repairing vehicles. It recommended hotels. It included maps and distances between towns. There were even suggestions for places to eat. Not because André Michelin wished to become a food critic, but because hungry travelers eventually need dinner. Every page served a single purpose: keep the motorist moving. Today, marketing often interrupts our lives. Advertisements appear before videos. Commercials interrupt television programs. Pop-up windows block websites. The Michelin Guide did something radically different. Instead of interrupting the customer, it became useful. People wanted to carry it. They referred to it repeatedly throughout their journey. Without realizing it, motorists spent hours interacting with the Michelin name, not because they were being sold something, but because the company had genuinely improved their experience. Long before phrases like content marketing or brand loyalty existed, the Michelin brothers had discovered both. The guide itself was free. That decision was important. Charging money would discourage people from obtaining it. The brothers weren't trying to profit from the book. The profit came later, when those same readers wore out their tires. It was an investment, one that quietly encouraged every owner of an automobile to travel just a little farther than they otherwise might have. One more town, one more hotel, one more scenic road, one more restaurant, one more set of tires. The mathematics were surprisingly elegant. Every kilometre, driven slowly erased tiny particles of rubber. Thousands of kilometres eventually meant replacement. The Michelin brothers had transformed the ordinary act of taking a holiday into part of their business model. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the guide was something it never openly said. It never begged readers to purchase Michelin tires. It didn't need to. Its usefulness spoke louder than any advertisement could. Trust was being built one successful journey at a time. A traveller who safely reached his destination with the help of the little red book was likely to carry it again. And again. Eventually, he might recommend it to friends. Entire families began planning journeys around its pages. Hotels welcomed inclusion. Mechanics appreciated the new customers. Restaurant owners noticed unfamiliar travelers arriving from distant towns. Without fanfare, a network was beginning to form. The guide connected people who had never met. Travelers, businesses, communities. It quietly stitched France together, one journey at a time. Looking back from the 21st century, it is easy to assume the Michelin Guide was always destined to become famous. History rarely feels inevitable while it is happening. To André and Édouard Michelin, this was simply another experiment. Another attempt to encourage people to embrace the automobile. Whether the guide would survive a few years or disappear into obscurity, no one could say. Even the brothers could not have imagined what their modest publication would become. For hidden among its pages, almost unnoticed, were small listings for restaurants, nothing elaborate, no stars, no rankings, no promises of culinary greatness, just names, addresses, places where a weary traveller might enjoy a satisfying meal before continuing down the road. Those humble listings would eventually become the most influential restaurant guide in history. But that transformation would take decades. Because before Michelin could teach the world where to eat, it first had to teach people. How wonderful it could be. Simply to travel, Chapter 6, when trust became more valuable than advertising. The greatest compliment a customer can give is not buying your product. It is believing your judgment. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Michelin Guide had quietly found its audience. Not overnight, not through clever slogans, not because of expensive advertising campaigns. It spread because it solved real problems. Motorists tucked the little red book beside their driving gloves. They carried it in leather satchels. Some kept it beneath the seat of their automobile, ready whenever the next journey called. For many owners, it became as essential as a spare tire. Each new edition improved upon the last. Roads were updated. Hotels were added. Mechanics came and went. Fuel suppliers changed locations. Distances were corrected. The Michelin brothers understood something that modern readers often take for granted. Information has value only if it remains accurate. An outdated guide was almost worse than no guide at all. Imagine following directions to a mechanic, only to discover he had moved away years earlier, or arriving at an inn listed in the guide, only to find its doors permanently closed. Trust could disappear as quickly as it had been earned. So Michelin committed itself to constant revision. Employees travelled, notes were collected, errors were corrected. The guide slowly became a living document rather than a one-time publication. It reflected a France that was constantly changing, and so were the automobiles. Every year, engines became a little stronger. Reliability improved. Manufacturers competed fiercely to convince buyers that their latest machines were faster, safer, and more dependable than the previous year's model. The automobile was beginning to shed its reputation as a toy for the wealthy. Doctors used them. Businessmen relied upon them. Engineers traveled between factories. Even adventurous families began taking leisurely drives into the countryside simply because they could. A new word entered everyday conversation. Tourism. Not the grand tours of aristocrats, not months-long expeditions across Europe, but ordinary people taking short journeys for pleasure, driving to a nearby village, visiting the coast, exploring mountain roads, stopping wherever curiosity led them. For the Michelin brothers, this was exactly the future they had hoped to encourage. Every successful journey meant another driver growing more confident. Every confident driver represented another lifelong customer. Yet the guide itself was beginning to develop a personality of its own. People no longer opened it merely to find a repair shop. They began discussing its recommendations. This hotel was exactly as described. The road through this valley was beautiful. The inn in the next town serves an excellent dinner. The guide had become more than information. It had become advice. Advice people trusted. That distinction was profound. There is a difference between publishing facts and earning credibility. Michelin had quietly achieved both. Then came one of the most famous stories in the company's history. Whether the conversation unfolded exactly as later remembered is impossible to know. But the lesson behind it became part of Michelin legend. Around 1920, André Michelin visited one of his tire dealers. As he walked through the workshop, something caught his eye. A copy of the Michelin Guide had been placed beneath a workbench. Its pages were supporting one uneven leg, keeping the table level. To most people, it would have been an amusing sight. To André Michelin, it revealed an uncomfortable truth. If something is given away, people often fail to appreciate its value. According to company tradition, André quietly remarked, "People only respect what they pay for." Whether those were his exact words, no one can say with certainty. But his actions left little doubt about his thinking. The free guide had served its purpose. Now it needed to grow up. That same year, the Michelin Guide underwent one of the most significant transformations in its history. For the first time since its introduction, 2 decades earlier, it was no longer free. The price was set at 7 francs. To modern ears, charging for a guidebook may seem unremarkable. In 1920, it represented a philosophical shift. Michelin was no longer asking readers to accept a complimentary advertisement. It was asking them to purchase a publication worthy of their trust. At the same time, something equally important disappeared. Advertising. Earlier editions had included advertisements from businesses eager to reach motorists. Those advertisements generated income, but they also created questions. Could a hotel that paid for advertising receive more favorable treatment? Would readers trust recommendations surrounded by commercial promotions? The Michelin brothers made a bold decision. The advertisements were removed. The guide would stand on its own merits. Its recommendations would no longer appear beside paid promotions. The message was subtle, but powerful. The guide's loyalty belonged to its readers, not its advertisers. That single decision strengthened the publication's credibility immeasurably. Restaurants, hotels, and businesses could no longer assume that purchasing advertising would improve their standing. Reputation had to be earned. As the editors looked toward the future, another trend became impossible to ignore. Readers were increasingly interested in one particular section of the guide, Not the mechanics, not the fuel suppliers, not even the hotels, the restaurants. Letters arrived praising memorable meals. Travelers recommended hidden establishments in small villages. Some inns became known almost entirely because motorists repeatedly stopped there after reading the guide. The editors recognized an opportunity, not to sell more books, but to make the guide even more useful. After all, every journey eventually pauses for a meal. If the guide could help travelers avoid disappointment, it would become even more valuable, quietly, almost without fanfare. The restaurant listings began receiving greater attention. Descriptions became more careful, standards became more consistent, comparisons became more thoughtful. The Michelin Guide wasn't trying to discover the finest restaurants in France. Not yet. It was trying to answer a far simpler question. If you are hungry, where should you stop? No one inside Michelin could have imagined where that question would eventually lead. Because, hidden within those growing restaurant reviews, the foundation was being laid for something entirely new, something astonishingly simple. A single symbol, small enough to fit beside a restaurant's name, powerful enough to change lives. The star. But before Michelin could award its first one, it faced another challenge. How do you judge excellence fairly? Who decides what makes one meal better than another? Can taste, something deeply personal, ever be measured objectively? The answers to those questions would shape not only the future of the guide, but the future of fine dining itself. Chapter 7. The Birth of the Star. Great reputations are rarely built in a single day. Sometimes, they begin with a single symbol. By the early 1920s, the Michelin Guide had become something its creators had never originally intended. It was no longer simply a handbook for motorists. It had become a trusted companion. Every new edition reflected thousands of kilometers traveled by Michelin staff. Roads had been checked, hotels revisited, distances verified, restaurants carefully observed. Readers noticed something remarkable. The guide was dependable. If Michelin recommended a hotel, there was a good chance it would meet expectations. If Michelin described a road as difficult, drivers prepared themselves accordingly. And if Michelin suggested a restaurant, travelers often discovered exactly what they had hoped to find. Trust, once earned, is an extraordinary thing. It cannot be manufactured in a factory. It cannot be purchased through advertising. It grows slowly, one honest recommendation at a time. By now, restaurants across France had begun paying attention. Many proprietors proudly displayed the latest Michelin Guide near the entrance, not because they had received an award. There were no awards. Not yet. Simply being included had become a mark of respect. It meant travelers were finding their establishment. Meals once served almost exclusively to local customers were now enjoyed by visitors from Paris, Lyon, Marseille, even neighboring countries. For many small restaurants, the guide had quietly become an important source of business. Michelin's editors recognized an emerging challenge. Not every restaurant was equal. Some offered hearty, dependable country cooking. Others served refined meals prepared with extraordinary skill. Yet inside the guide, they appeared almost identical. Travelers increasingly wanted more than directions. They wanted guidance. If they could visit only one restaurant during a long journey, which should they choose? The editors searched for a solution. Whatever system they created needed to satisfy several conditions. It had to be simple. It had to be understood instantly. It had to work whether the reader spoke French, English, German, or Italian. And above all, it had to communicate quality without lengthy explanations. The answer arrived in 1926. Michelin introduced a small symbol beside selected restaurants: 1 star. There was no elaborate announcement, no celebration, no ceremony, just a discreet mark printed beside the names of establishments considered particularly good. It was understated, almost modest, yet its meaning was immediately understood. This restaurant deserved special attention. At first, the single star served as little more than a recommendation, but human nature has an interesting habit. Once one restaurant receives recognition, people inevitably begin asking another question: which restaurant is the very best? It wasn't enough to know which establishments were excellent. Travelers wanted to distinguish between excellence and exceptional excellence. Michelin found itself facing a problem of its own creation. 1 star could no longer describe the full range of dining experiences inspectors were discovering throughout France. Some meals were undeniably better than others. How could that difference be expressed fairly? The company resisted making changes too quickly. After all, its reputation depended upon consistency. If the standards became confusing, the public's confidence might disappear. For several years, Michelin studied the problem. Inspectors continued traveling. Notes accumulated. Comparisons were made. Standards slowly evolved. Then, in 1931, Michelin introduced the system the world still recognizes today: 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars. 3 symbols, each carrying an entirely different meaning. 1 star meant a very good restaurant in its category, worth stopping if you happened to be nearby. 2 stars meant excellent cooking, worth a detour. Imagine driving across France. You intended to continue straight ahead. But Michelin believed this meal was so impressive, it justified changing your route. The restaurant itself became part of the journey. Then came the highest distinction: 3 stars, exceptional cuisine, worth a special journey. Notice the wording. Michelin never claimed these restaurants served the most expensive food, or the fanciest surroundings, or the largest portions. The highest award was based on something much simpler. Would the meal alone justify the entire trip? Would you willingly travel hundreds of kilometers, perhaps even across the country, just to experience what happened inside that dining room? If the answer was yes, 3 stars. Those definitions revealed something fascinating, even at its highest level. The Michelin Guide still thought like a travel guide. The language was never merely about food. It was about movement, a destination, a road, a journey. The restaurant wasn't separated from the voyage. It completed it. In 1936, Michelin formally published the meaning of each rating. For the first time, readers understood exactly what the stars represented. The definitions were concise, elegant, and remarkably durable. Nearly a century later, they remain fundamentally unchanged. Behind those simple symbols, however, lay a question that few readers ever considered. Who decided? Who possessed the authority to award or withhold one of these coveted stars? Surely it couldn't be left to chance. It couldn't depend upon a restaurant owner's reputation, or popularity, or advertising budget. No. If the stars were to mean anything, someone had to travel. Someone had to taste. Someone had to judge. Quietly, fairly, without favor, without recognition. The Michelin Guide needed people who could walk into a restaurant as complete strangers. Order dinner, pay the bill, leave unnoticed, and write a report capable of changing a chef's future. The age of the Michelin inspector was about to begin. Chapter 8: The Anonymous Judges. The most influential critics in the world are often the ones nobody recognizes. By the mid-1930s, the Michelin Guide had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer simply helping motorists find a pleasant place to eat. It was helping define excellence itself. A single star could introduce a restaurant to travelers from across France. 2 stars could persuade motorists to leave the main road in search of an unforgettable meal. 3 stars. 3 stars had become something far greater. A destination. For chefs, the stars represented recognition from one of the most respected guidebooks in the country. For travelers, they represented confidence. If Michelin recommended the journey was probably worth taking. But every recommendation raised an important question. Who made these decisions? The Michelin Guide never asked its readers to trust a celebrity chef, or a famous newspaper columnist, or a wealthy restaurant owner. Instead, it asked them to trust people they would never meet, the Michelin inspectors. Unlike many critics of the era, Michelin's inspectors worked in almost complete anonymity. They did not announce their arrival. They did not request special treatment. Restaurants received no advance warning. An inspector simply walked through the front door like any other guest. Perhaps alone, perhaps accompanied by another diner. Nothing about their appearance was meant to attract attention. They ordered from the menu. They waited for their meal. They observed. They tasted. They paid the bill. And then they quietly disappeared. The restaurant might never know an inspector had been there. For Michelin, anonymity was essential. The moment a restaurant knew an inspector had arrived, the experience changed. The finest ingredients might suddenly appear. The head chef would likely take personal control of every plate. Extra staff might be assigned to a single table. The meal would no longer represent what ordinary guests experienced. Michelin wanted authenticity, not performance. The inspector's reports became the foundation upon which the guide built its reputation. Every observation mattered. Not just whether the food tasted good, but whether it remained good. Again, and again, and again. Consistency became one of Michelin's defining principles. A restaurant should not be extraordinary on Saturday evening and disappointing on Tuesday afternoon. Travelers deserved the same quality regardless of when they arrived. This philosophy required patience. One memorable dinner was rarely enough, especially for the guide's highest honors. Restaurants were often visited multiple times before important decisions were made, sometimes by different inspectors, sometimes months apart. The goal was not perfection during a single evening. The goal was excellence over time. As the guide evolved, Michelin refined the principles that guided its inspectors. Although the exact methods remained confidential, the company consistently emphasized that stars were awarded primarily for what appeared on the plate, not the size of the dining room, not expensive decorations, not crystal chandeliers, not silver cutlery. A modest countryside inn could earn recognition if its cooking reached an exceptional standard. Likewise, a magnificent dining room could be overlooked if the food failed to impress. Eventually, Michelin would publicly describe 5 broad qualities inspectors considered. The quality of the ingredients, mastery of cooking techniques, the harmony of flavors, the personality of the chef expressed through the cuisine, and perhaps most importantly, consistency. Not just throughout one meal, but throughout the entire menu, across every season. Year after year, those principles helped distinguish Michelin from many other restaurant guides. It was never intended to reward luxury alone. Some of France's most celebrated dining rooms were indeed elegant. Others were surprisingly simple. What united them was not appearance, but craftsmanship. Still, no system designed by human beings can ever be entirely free from debate. Food is deeply personal. One person's unforgettable meal may leave another person unimpressed. Regional traditions vary enormously. What delights diners in Provence may differ from expectations in Normandy. Can excellence truly be measured? Michelin believed it could, not through personal preference alone, but through discipline, technique, consistency, respect for ingredients. The guide understood that complete objectivity might be impossible, yet it believed fairness remained achievable. Over time, the inspectors themselves became the subject of fascination. Stories spread throughout the culinary world. Restaurant owners speculated endlessly. Was that quiet gentleman at table 4 an inspector? What about the woman dining alone last Tuesday? Did the couple asking detailed questions work for Michelin? The truth was, no one knew, and that uncertainty changed behavior. Many chefs came to believe they should prepare every service as though an inspector might walk through the door. In a curious way, Michelin's greatest influence often occurred when no inspector was present at all. The possibility was enough. The guide had quietly created a culture of constant excellence. But with growing influence came growing responsibility. A favorable review might bring a full dining room. A star could transform a family's livelihood. Losing one could be heartbreaking. Michelin understood the weight of those decisions. Its inspectors were not merely choosing where travelers should eat. Their judgments increasingly affected careers, reputations, businesses, and dreams that had taken decades to build. The Little Red Book had traveled a remarkable distance from its beginnings in 1900. What started as a practical handbook for motorists had become one of the most respected publications in the culinary world. Yet beyond France, a far greater audience still waited. As automobiles spread across Europe, the Michelin Guide would follow. Its influence would cross borders, languages, cultures, and eventually, entire oceans. The stars that once guided French motorists would soon become symbols recognized around the world. Chapter 9. A Guide Through War. Some books are written for peaceful journeys. History sometimes gives them a very different purpose. War. The Michelin Guide had been created for travelers. Its pages were filled with optimism, roads waiting to be explored, villages waiting to be discovered, hotels welcoming weary motorists, restaurants serving meals at the end of a long day's drive. It celebrated movement, freedom, curiosity. Yet history has a way of interrupting even the most peaceful ambitions. The first decades of the 20th century had been marked by extraordinary progress. Automobiles improved year after year. Roads expanded. Travel became increasingly accessible. France, like much of Europe, seemed to be entering an age of unprecedented mobility. Then, in 1914, Europe descended into war. The First World War transformed nearly every aspect of daily life. Factories that once produced civilian goods were redirected toward military production. Steel became weapons. Rubber became military equipment. Fuel became a strategic resource. The open roads that had once welcomed adventurous motorists now carried soldiers, supplies, and artillery. For Michelin, the war demanded sacrifice. The company adapted its factories to support France's war effort. Like countless manufacturers across Europe, production shifted to meet military needs. The carefree spirit of touring the countryside disappeared beneath the grim reality of conflict. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, Europe emerged profoundly changed. Entire regions had been devastated. Roads needed rebuilding. Communities struggled to recover. Yet amid the destruction, something remarkable also occurred. The automobile had proven its value. During the war, motor vehicles transported troops, supplies, medical personnel, and equipment on a scale never before imagined. Governments now understood that automobiles were no passing novelty. They had become essential. As Europe slowly rebuilt during the 1920s, civilian motoring entered a new era. Better roads appeared. Automobile ownership continued to grow. Touring once again became a symbol of freedom, and the Michelin Guide returned to its original purpose, helping people travel. For nearly 2 decades, Europe enjoyed relative peace. The Michelin Guide expanded. The star system was introduced. Inspectors traveled farther than ever before. Restaurants proudly displayed their growing reputations. It seemed as though the little red book had finally found its place in the modern world. Then history repeated itself. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, France and Great Britain declared war. The Second World War had begun. Once again, Europe's roads belonged not to vacationers, but to armies. Tourism vanished almost overnight. Hotels closed or were requisitioned for military use. Fuel was rationed. Restaurants struggled with shortages. Long-distance pleasure travel became nearly impossible. Under these circumstances, publishing a guide for motorists no longer made sense. The annual Michelin Guide was suspended. There were simply too many unknowns. A bridge open 1 week might be destroyed the next. A hotel welcoming guests in spring could stand abandoned by autumn. Even road conditions changed with the movement of armies. The information upon which Michelin had built its reputation could no longer be guaranteed. For a company whose greatest asset was trust, publishing outdated information was unthinkable. Yet the guide's story was far from over. In fact, its most unexpected chapter was about to begin. As Allied planners prepared for the liberation of Western Europe, they faced an enormous logistical challenge. How do you navigate an occupied country? Road signs had been removed, altered, or destroyed. German forces understood that invading armies depended upon accurate navigation. A single missing road sign could delay an advancing column for hours. Entire units might lose valuable time searching for unfamiliar villages. Reliable maps became as important as weapons. The Allies needed information. Not political information, not military intelligence, practical information, road layouts, town plans, distances, street names. Exactly the sort of information the Michelin Guide had been carefully collecting for decades. Among the many editions published before the war, one proved especially valuable. The 1939 Michelin Guide to France. It represented the last comprehensive survey of the country before the German occupation dramatically altered everyday life. Recognizing its usefulness, Allied military planners arranged for special reproductions of the guide to be printed for officers preparing for the invasion of France. It was an extraordinary twist of history. A publication created to encourage peaceful holidays was now helping military commanders navigate a continent at war. Imagine the irony. Only a generation earlier, André and Édouard Michelin had hoped motorists would use their guide to discover charming villages and memorable restaurants. Now, military officers studied many of the very same pages while planning one of history's largest amphibious invasions. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, D-Day, they entered a country where familiar landmarks had changed dramatically. Bridges had been destroyed, roads damaged, entire towns scarred by years of occupation and conflict. The Michelin Guide could not predict every obstacle, but its carefully prepared maps, distances, and town plans provided an invaluable foundation for navigation. It remains one of the most unusual roles any travel guide has ever played. The little red book had become an unexpected tool of liberation. Yet even during war, its identity never truly changed. It remained at heart a guide for travelers. Only now. The travelers wore uniforms. As Allied forces gradually liberated France throughout 1944, another transformation quietly began. Hotels reopened, roads were repaired, restaurants lit their dining rooms once more. The sounds of artillery slowly gave way to the sounds of ordinary life. Families began traveling again. Businessmen returned to the roads. Vacationers rediscovered the countryside. The world the Michelin brothers had dreamed of decades earlier was slowly returning. And waiting patiently was the little red guide, ready once again to accompany travelers wherever the road might lead. But the world emerging after 1945 would be different from the one that had disappeared 6 years earlier. Automobiles would become more common than ever before. International tourism would flourish, and the Michelin Guide would soon leave France behind. The next journey would carry it across borders, across oceans, and eventually around the world. Chapter 10. Beyond the roads of France. The greatest journeys rarely end where they begin. When the Second World War ended in 1945, Europe faced an enormous task. Entire cities lay in ruins. Bridges had to be rebuilt, railways repaired, factories reopened, families reunited. For millions of people, simply returning to ordinary life became an extraordinary achievement. Yet alongside the rebuilding came something else. Hope. The years immediately following the war witnessed one of the greatest periods of reconstruction in modern history. Roads stretched farther. Automobiles became more reliable. Manufacturers embraced new technologies developed during the war. Engines became smaller, yet more powerful. Fuel became easier to obtain. Governments invested heavily in modern highways. For the first time, owning an automobile began moving beyond the wealthy elite. The family car was becoming a reality. To André Michelin, this had always been the dream. Sadly, he would never live to see it. André Michelin had passed away in 1931, nearly a decade before the Second World War. His younger brother, Édouard, died in 1940 during the difficult first year of the conflict. Neither brother witnessed the post-war explosion of automobile travel. Neither saw families loading suitcases into their cars for summer holidays. Neither experienced the great age of road trips that their life's work had helped make possible. Yet their ideas survived them. Sometimes, the measure of a visionary is not what he sees during his lifetime, but what continues long after he is gone. As Europe healed, the Michelin Guide returned to publication. Inspectors once again traveled from village to village. Restaurants reopened their kitchens. Hotels welcomed travelers. The little red book resumed the work it had begun nearly half a century earlier, helping people discover the road. But something had changed. In the early years, the guide primarily answered practical questions. Where can I repair my automobile? Where can I buy fuel? Where can I spend the night? By the late 1940s and early 1950s, those questions had become easier to answer. Road signs improved, automobile clubs expanded, governments invested in transportation infrastructure. drivers grew more confident. As practical information became increasingly available elsewhere, the restaurant section became increasingly important. Travelers still appreciated maps, but now they also wanted memorable experiences. The journey itself remained important. Yet increasingly, people began choosing destinations because of what awaited them there. A family might drive hundreds of kilometers to visit the seaside. A businessman might extend a trip by a day after hearing of an exceptional restaurant. Friends planned weekends around recommendations printed inside the Michelin Guide. Without intending to, Michelin had begun influencing tourism itself. Entire villages benefited when travelers stopped for lunch. Small inns became famous far beyond their local communities. Chefs who had once cooked only for neighbors suddenly welcomed guests from across Europe. The guide wasn't merely describing journeys anymore, it was creating them. Then, in 1955, Michelin introduced another distinction. Not every outstanding meal required white tablecloths or elaborate tasting menus. Some restaurants offered exceptional value rather than extraordinary luxury. To recognize them, Michelin created what would later become one of its most beloved symbols, the Bib Gourmand. Named after Bibendum, the Michelin man himself, it celebrated restaurants offering excellent food at reasonable prices. The decision reflected something deeply rooted in the company's philosophy. Good food should not belong exclusively to the wealthy. A memorable meal might be found in an elegant dining room, or inside a small family-run inn where recipes had passed through generations. Quality mattered more than extravagance. This broadened the guide's appeal. Travelers no longer viewed Michelin solely as a catalogue of elite dining. It became a guide for discovering remarkable cooking in many different forms. Meanwhile, the automobile itself continued transforming society. By the 1960s, families routinely packed their cars for holidays. Children stared through side windows as landscapes rolled by. Picnic baskets filled the trunks. New motorways connected cities once separated by long, exhausting journeys. Travel became part of everyday life. The Michelin brothers had once struggled to convince people simply to drive. Now, millions could hardly imagine life without an automobile. As international tourism expanded throughout the second half of the 20th century, the guide naturally followed. Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria. New editions appeared across Europe. Inspectors adapted to regional traditions. French sauces gave way to Italian pasta, German game dishes, Spanish seafood, Swiss mountain cuisine. Different cultures, different ingredients, different philosophies of cooking. Yet Michelin sought one common language: excellence, no matter where an inspector traveled. The same fundamental question remained. Would this meal justify the journey? By the closing decades of the 20th century, the Michelin Guide had become something almost unimaginable in 1900, an international authority, a restaurant receiving a Michelin star in Paris, London, Rome, or Madrid. Shared membership in a small and respected family recognized around the world. Yet one great culinary nation still remained beyond Michelin's reach: the United States. For decades, American chefs had watched from afar. They understood the guide's influence. Many dreamed of earning its recognition. But Michelin had never crossed the Atlantic. That finally changed in 2005. The Michelin Guide published its first American edition. The destination: New York City. 1 year later, San Francisco followed. Soon afterward, Las Vegas, Chicago, Washington. Each city welcomed the inspectors with equal measures of excitement and anxiety. The stars had arrived. But perhaps Michelin's greatest surprise still lay ahead. In 2007, the guide entered Japan. Some wondered whether a system born in France could truly evaluate Japanese cuisine. The answer astonished the culinary world. Tokyo quickly became the city with the greatest number of Michelin-starred restaurants anywhere on Earth. The message was unmistakable. Excellence spoke every language, whether expressed through French haute cuisine, Japanese sushi, Italian pasta, Spanish tapas, or a tiny neighborhood restaurant serving recipes perfected over generations. Michelin believed exceptional cooking could be found anywhere. The little red guide had traveled farther than André and Édouard Michelin could ever have imagined. From the volcanic hills of Clermont-Ferrand to nearly every corner of the culinary world. And yet, its greatest challenge still remained. Success brings influence. Influence brings responsibility. The more powerful the Michelin star became, the more lives it touched. For every chef who celebrated earning one, another feared losing it. For some, the stars represented achievement. For others, they became something much heavier. Expectation, pressure, perfection. Chapter 11. The Weight of 3 Stars. Success is often measured by the rewards we earn. Sometimes, it is also measured by the expectations that follow. There are few moments in a chef's career more unforgettable than learning that their restaurant has received a Michelin star. For some, it is the realization of a dream that began in childhood, years spent washing dishes, preparing vegetables, standing beside experienced chefs, working long hours in kitchens where mistakes are corrected immediately and perfection is expected every single day. The journey is rarely glamorous. While diners enjoy beautifully presented meals in elegant dining rooms, the kitchen tells a different story. Heat radiates from ovens. Knives strike cutting boards with rhythmic precision. Orders arrive one after another. Every plate must leave the kitchen looking as though it were the only one prepared that evening. A single mistake can delay an entire service. Every member of the brigade depends upon everyone else. It is a profession built upon discipline, patience, and repetition. Thousands upon thousands of repetitions. Most chefs understand they may never receive a Michelin star. The standards are extraordinarily high. Many exceptional restaurants never earn one. That fact alone makes the award remarkable. It is not intended as recognition for being good. It exists to recognize restaurants considered exceptional. When the guide announces its latest selections each year, emotions run high throughout the culinary world. Some restaurants celebrate, others wait anxiously. Many simply hope their stars remain unchanged. Because earning a Michelin star is only the beginning. Keeping it may be even harder. Imagine arriving at work every morning knowing that somewhere, perhaps today, perhaps next month, an anonymous inspector may walk through the front door. No warning, no announcement, no opportunity to prepare differently. Every customer must receive the same level of care. Every service must reflect the restaurant at its very best, not because someone important might be watching, but because every guest deserves that experience. In many ways, that philosophy has elevated standards throughout professional cooking. Restaurants cannot simply impress once. They must impress consistently, night after night, year after year. For diners, this commitment creates confidence. A traveler arriving from another country expects the meal described by Michelin to match the meal served. Consistency becomes part of the promise. Yet consistency demands sacrifice. Many chefs begin their day before sunrise. Fresh ingredients arrive early each morning. Stocks simmer for hours. Bread is baked. Vegetables prepared. Sauces tasted repeatedly. Menus adjusted to reflect the finest ingredients available that day. Long before the first guest enters the dining room, the work has already been underway for hours. And after the last customer leaves, cleaning begins. Preparations for tomorrow quietly follow. The public often sees only the finished plate, rarely the thousands of small decisions that made it possible. As Michelin's reputation grew, another change began taking place. Restaurants awarded stars frequently experienced dramatic increases in business. Reservations filled months in advance. International visitors appeared. Travel writers took notice. Hotels nearby benefited. Local suppliers often gained new customers. In some communities, a Michelin star influenced the economy far beyond a single dining room. The guide had become something no marketing campaign could easily reproduce. Independent recognition. People trusted it precisely because Michelin had spent decades earning that trust. Yet influence carries responsibility. And Michelin understood that every decision affected real people. A newly awarded star might transform a family's future. The loss of one could be deeply disappointing. Over the years, the guide has occasionally removed stars from restaurants whose standards no longer matched previous evaluations. Those decisions have always generated discussion. Some agreed, others disagreed. Restaurant owners questioned the judgments. Food critics debated the standards. Diners shared their own experiences. That conversation is perhaps inevitable. Food is personal. Memory is personal. A meal is never simply a collection of ingredients. It is shaped by company, mood, expectation, even the weather outside. Can any guide truly capture something so deeply human? Michelin has never claimed perfection. Instead, it has sought consistency. Its inspectors evaluate according to established principles. Their conclusions are reached after repeated visits and careful discussion. Not every observer agrees with every decision, but disagreement itself reflects something important. People care. They care because the stars have come to mean something. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of the Michelin Guide. Not that everyone agrees, but that nearly everyone understands the significance of earning one. Over time, some chefs chose a different path. A few asked Michelin not to include their restaurants. Others publicly returned their stars or requested to be removed from the guide. Their reasons varied. Some wished to escape expectations. Others preferred complete creative freedom. Still others wanted guests to judge the meal without the influence of awards. Their decisions reminded the culinary world of an important truth. A Michelin star is an honor. But it is not the only measure of excellence. Some extraordinary restaurants have never appeared in the guide. Some beloved neighborhood establishments have built loyal customers over generations without seeking international recognition. Great food exists in countless forms. Michelin celebrates one tradition of excellence. It does not define all of them. Perhaps that is the healthiest way to view the stars. Not as the final word, but as one respected voice among many. Even so, their influence remains undeniable. A symbol no larger than a fingertip can inspire careers, shape journeys, fill dining rooms, and encourage chefs to pursue standards they once believed impossible. It all began, not with a culinary school, not with a famous restaurant, but with two brothers who simply wanted people to spend more time on the road. That irony has never disappeared. The world's most famous restaurant award still bears the name of a tire company. Chapter 12, More Than Tires. Some inventions solve problems. Others quietly change the way the world lives. If André and Édouard Michelin could walk through the doors of a modern restaurant today, they might not recognize very much. The automobiles parked outside bear little resemblance to the noisy machines of the 19th century. Electric vehicles sit silently where engines once rattled. Drivers navigate with satellites instead of folded paper maps. A journey that once required days now takes only hours, and travelers carry more computing power in their pockets than entire governments possessed during the brothers' lifetime. The world they knew has disappeared. Yet one small symbol would still be instantly familiar: a Michelin star. It is remarkable to think that one of the world's most respected culinary honors owes its existence to a problem that had nothing to do with food. It began with rubber, with tires that wore out too slowly, with roads that were too empty, with a business searching for customers. History is filled with inventions born from necessity. Some disappear after solving the immediate problem. Others grow into something their creators never imagined. The Michelin Guide belongs firmly in the second category. What began as a practical handbook gradually became something much greater, not because Michelin set out to control fine dining, but because they understood something timeless about human nature. People need confidence before they explore. In 1900, that confidence came from knowing where to find fuel, where to repair a puncture, where to spend the night. Today, confidence comes from knowing that somewhere, perhaps hundreds or even thousands of kilometers from home, there is a restaurant where extraordinary care has been taken with every ingredient, every technique, and every plate. The destination changed. The purpose never did. Help people travel with confidence. The guide did something else as well. It quietly transformed travel itself. For centuries, journeys had often been about necessity: trade, business, pilgrimage, migration. The Michelin Guide helped celebrate another reason to travel: joy. It suggested that a destination could be worthwhile simply because something remarkable awaited there: a beautiful landscape, a welcoming inn, an unforgettable meal. Sometimes, the journey itself became the reward. Perhaps that is why the Michelin Guide has endured while so many other travel publications have faded into history. It never tried to tell people where they must go. It simply offered trusted recommendations and invited them to decide for themselves. Trust. That word appears again and again throughout this story. Trust built slowly over decades. Trust earned one inspection at a time. Trust maintained by consistency rather than advertising. It became the foundation upon which the entire guide rested. And that trust created something extraordinarily rare. A single star printed in a small red book became meaningful to people who had never met the inspectors, who had never spoken with Michelin, who simply believed that if the guide recommended a place, it was worth discovering. Few companies ever achieve that level of confidence from the public. Even fewer sustain it for more than a century. The Michelin brothers never lived to witness the full reach of their creation. They never saw travelers fly across oceans to dine in cities they had only read about. They never imagined that chefs in Tokyo, New York, Singapore, London, Mexico City, or Seoul would one day celebrate receiving an award bearing the Michelin name. Yet all of it grew from one simple observation made in France during the closing years of the 19th century. If people drive more, they'll buy more tires. On the surface, it sounds like a business strategy. In reality, it became a lesson in something much larger. The greatest businesses often succeed by helping others first. Michelin didn't persuade people to travel through clever advertising. They made travel easier, more enjoyable, more predictable, more rewarding. And when people traveled, the business prospered naturally. That lesson has echoed through more than a century of innovation. Sometimes the best way to sell something is not to convince people to buy it. It's to create a world where they genuinely want to use it. Today, millions of travelers have never purchased a Michelin tire. Many couldn't identify the Michelin Man by name. Some may not even realize that the Michelin Guide and the tire company are the same organization. Yet they know exactly what a Michelin star represents. That may be the greatest measure of the brothers' success. Their original product became famous. Their unexpected creation became legendary. There is a quiet irony in all of this. The Michelin brothers wanted people to wear out their tires. Instead, they inspired generations to wear out passports, camera shutters, walking shoes, and countless reservations made in pursuit of extraordinary experiences. In the end, their greatest invention was never the removable pneumatic tire. It was curiosity, the belief that somewhere farther down the road, something wonderful might be waiting. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the Michelin Guide. Not a list of restaurants, not a collection of stars, not even a travel book. It is an invitation to keep exploring, to keep wondering, to take the next road, simply because you do not yet know where it leads. More than 125 years after two brothers looked at a struggling rubber company and searched for a solution, their idea continues to send people on journeys they never expected to take. From a quiet factory in Clermont-Ferrand to roads that circle the globe, their story reminds us that history's greatest destinations are sometimes reached by taking a single, uncertain step forward. And somewhere tonight, a traveler is unfolding a map, making a reservation, or turning onto an unfamiliar road because of an idea born in 1889. Not bad. For a company that only wanted to sell more tires, the Ember and Ink Studios would like to thank you for listening to tonight's story. If there is a dark, grim tale, forgotten legend, or strange piece of history you would like to hear next, please leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed tonight's story, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss a tale from the archive. Until then, keep the fire burning and the stories alive.